Good afternoon, everyone. And this is our fourth South Asia Roundtable that is taking place uh, under the Ubuntu Global MenEngage Symposium. We are quite happy to have you all today with us because it's a quite interesting and very relevant topic that we are going to discuss today. For our South Asia Roundtable, and we do have a very distinguished panel of speakers with us who have been working on gender and men and masculinities issues in South Asia and also in global platforms as well. So we are quite excited to listen to them and see how they have seen how they bring their experiences and understanding to contribute to our topic on decolonizing gendered power structures in South Asia. As for MenEngage Alliance, those who have been with the MenEngage Alliance knows that it had been quite a strong kind of a area of discussion for MenEngage Alliance, where we do have regions coming from both north and south, and we know that how certain economic and political structures in these north and south context sometimes do support each other, but sometimes do kind of have a kind of a power-based constructions where it affect our movement towards social justice. So it's kind of it's high time that both MenEngage Alliance globally and of course MenEngage Alliance globally had been discussing and talking about this topic quite closely. More with the engagement with our Ubuntu Symposium. The meaning I am because you are, and it's kind of connecting people and looking at kind of reflecting on our own selves, where we kind of bring our own perspectives, we bring our own understandings and learnings of power and gendered kind of stereotypes into the whole discussion of engaging men and boys or challenging or transforming masculinities. So I think we are since we are a bit past the time that we wanted to start. Let's kind of start soon with our discussion. Just to give you that, it has been 6 years since MenEngage Alliance members and partners who gathered in New Delhi, and with the second MenEngage Global Symposium, wanted to explore the state of field of work to transform masculinities and engagement and voice in gender and social justice. So far with these roundtables, we have been kind of looking back and seeing how far we have come and what progress have we made since then as MenEngage Alliance, and have we kind of reached the status that we wanted to reach, maybe as a global network and also as a regional network, and also maybe as national networks as well, bringing our own experiences from our country networks. So this Ubuntu Symposium and the regional roundtables definitely will provide an opportunity for people to kind of see how we look back and take some of the stock of our work and to share it with others, and how we link the symposium themes with our own experiences and our contexts, and also how we kind of identify challenges and potential obstacles to our regions when it comes to transforming masculinities, and also how we kind of come together and consider way forward over the maybe not maybe only for the coming months, because the symposium will definitely continue until June, but even years after that, how are we looking into the movement building, and the movement building which actually do not divide us as south or north or with any other demarcations in that case. So that's the whole purpose of these roundtables that we have been having so far. And the last roundtable we have been discussing how the theme of nationalism, because it's a very relevant area for South Asia, and how it kind of had affected the economic, political, and social context of South Asia, and ultimately how civil society can take actions and maybe advocate to change in certain maybe policy changes, or maybe like change in attitudes and behaviors of people from the ground level. So that had been the main topic for the last roundtable. So decolonizing power structures is like it had been happening over the last, I don't know, maybe 100 200 years, but still we see when it comes to South Asia, we see that if we look at our laws, if we look at our cultures, if you look at the way we understand our the sex and sexualities, and maybe our political structures, the government, how the governments are being structured, all these things are still so much under colonized way of understanding or colonized way of structuring, and we sometimes kind of do not want to discuss those things for the benefit of the people who are in power, but we know that how it affects the people who are kind of who wants to kind of have social a way of a justice way of life, and I mean, like giving one example from Sri Lankan context, myself as the regional coordinator for MenEngage South Asia, coming from Sri Lanka, just to give one example from Sri Lanka, we know that the Ordinance Act, the Vagrants Act in Sri Lanka, it's like 150 years old, and still we are kind of charging women who are who go into public life after 6 o'clock in the evening under that same law, and still we are fighting to change that particular law. And even very recently we saw that a few women who were on the road maybe like around 10 p.m. in the night had been charged according to this vagrants law that it had been established under the British law. So I mean, there could be hundreds of examples coming from countries in South Asia, specifically Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and I think India. It will be quite interesting, and of course we have a distinguished speaker coming from Nepal context, and I'm sure she will also look at the whole of South Asia and see how it had kind of we can't take Nepal out of South Asia. So in putting Nepal also in the context and see how we as South Asia have been affected by these kind of colonized way of structuring our society. So I will not take much time. I will hand over to Renushi. Renushi had been with us for some time now with the MenEngage South Asia Secretariat as a project officer, and I think she's a undergraduate at the University of Colombo, but brings a lot of experiences, brings a lot of kind of youth activism into the whole way of working with the MenEngage Alliance. So Renushi will be moderating our session today. So I invite Renushi to take from here. Thank you, Renushi.
Thank you, Samita. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to take too long in terms of introducing about the topic, because Samita also had a lot of great insights on why the regional network also decided to go for a topic like this. But in sum, just to give you an idea as to why we thought this was relevant is because, the issue of decolonizing gendered power structures in South Asia, we thought was important in order to draw attention to the gendered and politicized, elements of the colonial legacies that were left behind in South Asia. So having said that, I'm not going to take too long, but in brief, the speakers that we have today that I'm really excited to introduce today, we do have a varied background, speakers coming from academia to filmmaking to art and culture. I think we can really benefit from multiple perspectives for the purpose of this discussion, especially considering the fact that, you know, a topic like decolonization is best understood through an intersectional lens. So having said that, before introducing the speakers, I'd just like to go over a few items before we proceed. So while thanking everyone who joined us today and who is also watching our live stream, please, we would really like to include your voices in the conversation. So feel free to ask questions, share your comments, ideas, and even challenge our ideas if it's necessary. So I invite you to use the chat box as the session goes. And we do hope to have a brief Q&A session towards the end of the roundtable for anyone who would like to unmute and speak to our panelists directly. So before further ado, at this point, I'd actually like to acknowledge Ms. Bandana Rana from Nepal, who will be our first speaker today. If we can share the screen, or let me do that.
Shall I do it?
No worries, Samita.
Okay, sure.
Okay, thanks. Here we go. Okay. So Ms. Rana is a member of the Cedaw committee, a member of the UNFPA High-Level Commission on the ICPD 25 follow-up. She also chairs the Global Network of Women Peace Builders and is the co-founder and strategic advisor of Sati Nepal, among various other distinguished posts. So thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. So let me just get into the question right away. So drawing from your experience, we know that Nepal, although it was never colonized, drawing from your career and your experience, we would like to know more about experience from Nepal as well as the wider region as to what is the impact of colonization on matters concerning gender. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join this round table, particularly because I have been engaged in the MenEngage movement for quite some time. In fact, I attended the second Global Symposium in New Delhi, and then I had the honor of moderating the opening session of the Ubuntu Symposium panel in November. And since I've been, very much involved in MenEngage movement and promote engaging men and boys for addressing gender-based violence within the Cedaw committee, I'm very, very happy to join this roundtable. However, I thought, as I am from Nepal, and as Nepal is one of the few countries that has never been colonized, I also thought maybe I'm not the right person to speak on the experiences of colonizations or impact of colonization. And as I was, only yesterday afternoon trying to think what I would want to speak on or reflect on, I also realized that I haven't reflected on decolonization at all. So I am actually looking forward to this roundtable and learning a lot. But I said I have to speak and I have to be engaged in this roundtable. So what can I talk about? So I was trying to reflect some thoughts and a number of examples, which I thought was to some extent an impact of colonization, whether it was in the surrounding countries or the perspective. I felt I had some experiences directly that I had faced. So in this first round, I would actually like to share those. But I also think that, deep-rooted impact of colonization and dominant gendered social norms paradigm in South Asia are quite common, whether it's about honor and shame, purity and pollution, customary practices, citizenship rights, extreme poverty, health vulnerabilities, armed conflict, or gender-based violence. And these norms are deeply rooted in the social realities of religion, caste, race, ethnicity, class, age, and disability. And of course, Nepal is not an exception in that regard. So I would just like to share some of my very interesting perspectives, more on, more not on actually policies and laws, but more on personal attitudes and behaviors and perceptions that I have directly experienced, In early 1990s, I was journalist then, but I was recruited by UNDP Nepal as a communication consultant to enhance their communication reach out within a number of projects to see how those were being delivered to the beneficiaries from a communications and a participatory perspective. So I was very happy as a young girl to be called a consultant. Perhaps that was my first consultant, title as such. And I was there. So I actually was very passionate and really delved into, studied a lot of things, took a lot of perceptions from beneficiaries of several categories at all levels in the field, and came up with a very rich idea of how communications needs to be and could be enhanced so that projects deliver better. And so excitedly, I actually shared this with the high-level management team of UNDP, including the resident representative, who was a female then from a Western country. And I got a very watered type of reaction, because initially they were very excited, but then the response was not too good. And I was really disappointed because I had taken a lot of pains to do that. But anyway, I forgot about it. After 6 months, another consultant, a foreign international consultant, a man from a Western country, was recruited as an international communications consultant, and I had to work. He was my immediate boss. In the initial days, I was in awe of him. One, he was so eloquent. He spoke so well. He seemed to be so articulate, and of course, English is not my first language. And I was in awe of the vocabulary that he would use. And he had a powerful voice and a pleasant personality. So definitely I was really in awe with him. Here was a man that I had to work under, and he seemed so good, But as some months, not even some months, actually, some weeks passed, I realized that his knowledge, not just about Nepal, but generally as such, was quite shallow, in terms of, he was articulate, he spoke well, but he was quite shallow. So he would depend a lot on my knowledge and expertise to be presented to the high-level management, where I wouldn't then attend. He would be attending, So, and he would appreciate what I contributed. So after some weeks, I told him about this big plan, that big reflections that I had on these. And then he looked at it and he appreciated it. He wanted the whole document. He took it home. And, after a few days, he said, I just changed a few phrases, but I'm going to present this to the senior management. And it was exactly that. There were no changes at all, except for some phrases and vocabulary, perhaps, And when he presented this to the senior management, it was acknowledged so well. It was thought to be one of the most excellent communication strategies and policies. So that actually, now that I reflect on it, when I said I have to speak in this roundtable, I was thinking about my span of my journey on activism. And I realized perhaps that's also an impact of colonization, that when you have a foreign head, you think that the foreign head can think much better than a person who has a national expertise on the ground. And here I'm not just talking about here it was a female boss, a male international consultant, and I was a female national consultant, so that was the dynamics over there. But I'm not just talking about international consultants. I'm also saying that even in many occasions, even now, once you have a foreign voice entering a dialogue, the whole dynamics changes. And we all tend to think that person is the most knowledgeable person, So I think that image also is some impact of colonization rule that it has. That's one of my experience that I wanted to share. The other thing that I wanted to share, which has come up in the social media recently, is about a missionary school in Nepal, where I actually passed out also from. And, let me share with you that Nepal is one of the only South Asian country which has legalized homosexuality and, recognizes the protection of LGBTI rights in its constitutional provisions itself. So it's one of the, I think it's the first country to include LGBTI in its federal census in 2011. So that progressive, we have such progressive policies. But recently in a missionary school, some young girls, protested from the social media that they were punished or retributed because they had cut their hair short. They were not allowed to keep their hair short. They had to keep it at a certain length above the shoulder, or below the shoulder, or something like that. So, I mean, this again, I feel, and the missionary administration said that, LGBTI is a sin, homosexuality is a sin, and cottage girls can't keep their hair short. So I again think no matter how the country has progressed in policies and laws, there are still those remnants which are so strong and rigid and so deeply rooted, So those are the two examples that I have from Nepal. But the other part now, one more example that I want to share from India now. In New Delhi, in 2015, one of my family member, my mother-in-law, in fact, was critically sick, and she had to undergo an emergency surgery, which couldn't be undertaken in Nepal, so it was referred to New Delhi, in a very popular, very famous hospital. So I and my daughter, went to this foreign country. We had, of course, taken an appointment from a known doctor who was there, who was supposed to undertake the surgery. In his name, we had deposited our money, account, everything. So here we went, early morning flight. We were whisked, she was taken in the ambulance. We were whisked to the hospital. And as soon as we reached the hospital, she was taken in a wheelchair and she was whisked off on a bed. There was a small team of doctors or medical practitioners there, but the doctor that we had been referred to was not there at all. Then it was around 5 or 6 hours. We hadn't seen our patient. They had whisked our patient away. They were not updating us on anything. And they would not allow us inside. We hadn't even seen it. And we hadn't prepared our patient that she was undergoing a major surgery, So, of course, we were very, very worried. And being in India, it's a foreign country for me, being in India, most Nepalese speak Hindi. So I did have that knowledge too. So my daughter and me, clad in a very modest salwar kameez, tried to communicate in this Hindi language, because it's a foreign country and we wanted to communicate in the local language. And we were totally ignored, not allowed, not given any update, any information, not allowed to see the patient. And after 6 hours, they informed us, after opening a door slightly ajar, that they informed us that a surgery would take place the next morning at 7 a.m. So that really shocked me. And then I said, this meek salwar kameez Hindi speaking is not going to work, So my daughter and I then decided that we have to speak in our English tone. So we started speaking in English, talked about our rights. They had something written on the wall about human rights or something. I said, this is a right. What is it that you have written and that you don't implement? We deserve to see our patient. We haven't prepared her. We don't know what kind of counseling you are giving to our patient, what state she is in. And the doctor who's supposed to do her surgery, we haven't even met him, and it is in his name that we have deposited all our money. So we refused to, and the whole thing changed. We were invited in. There was a counseling room that we weren't aware of. We had the right to counseling, and the doctor finally arrived at almost at 10 p.m. at night. If I hadn't said, the doctor wouldn't have met me, to meet me and then explain what was going on. So I again think, the language, speaking in English language, and perhaps dressing up in Western clothes, in trousers, would have those kinds of. Sorry, just what happened here? Okay. So this is my, yesterday I was thinking, what should I share? And I think this seemed to be relevant. One more thing, in Pakistan in 2017, the India was 2015. 2017, I was in Pakistan, in Islamabad. One of my friends wanted to take me out for lunch in a very high-profile international club where their membership was very restricted and only few were allowed. It was a well-known club. And after lunch, as we were roaming around the garden, I saw a placard saying, dogs and maids not allowed. So I thought was a clear example of the colonization impact, dogs and maids not allowed. So these thoughts, I'm not prepared, but these are thoughts that came to me when you talked about decolonization. As I said, this is the first time I'm attempting to speak on decolonization. I don't have any scholarly experience or academic experience in this area, but in my years of activism, I think this is the first time you've given me the opportunity to reflect my thoughts on this. And I do feel that this deep-rooted impact of colonization, particularly in terms of gender dynamics, is very much rooted, and it has to be seen, as Renushi said, from an intersectional lens. It has to be looked at not just at an individual, but also on institutional policies and machineries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rana. That was incredible insights, and also your personal anecdotes also did bring to light, how these colonial patterns actually manifest in the most subtle or sometimes indirect ways as well. Hopefully we can unpack more on those during the second round of questions. I would like to now move on to Professor Niladri, who is our second speaker for today. Let me quickly share his profile. Yes, so as you can see, Professor Niladri is a professor at the Department of English. Okay, at the University of Kalyani, and he is also a recipient of the Fulbright Scholarship and the British Council Charles Wallace Fellowship. He has co-edited several books, as you can see on the screen here, and has been teaching a course on gender at the university since 2009. In addition to his other commitments, he also runs a Facebook group called New Gender Studies. So without further ado, I'll get right into the question. So as a professor and someone who's been engaged in the field of academia, we're interested to know, drawing from your experience, do talk to us about how colonial thinking and approaches have impacted academia and pedagogical approaches in India.
Yes. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I have been teaching this course called New Gender Studies since 2009. And but before I talk about my experiences, let me just tell Ms. Rana how incredibly moved I was, because it really resonated with me, and it just seemed to. I was very, very moved to hear these anecdotes, because I felt that they were extremely relevant to the issues that are at stake at the moment. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing those anecdotes with us. I've been teaching this course called New Gender Studies since 2009. And, Renushi, the thing is that, because I'm in the discipline of English literature, so therefore that automatically means that English literature, the whole discipline, is by default colonial, in the sense that, when we study English literature, we are all studying British authors. And not only are we studying British authors, we are studying white British authors. Most importantly, we are studying, white male British authors. There will be one Jane Austen that will be put up, or one Mary Wollstonecraft, but it's primarily white, male, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, what is called WASP. So therefore, we basically study WASP writers. So what has been happening since the 1980s, I think, is that there has been an attempt to decolonize the English syllabus. So what that has happened is that there has been a gradual attempt at including literatures from what is now called the Global South. So therefore, we have optional papers now called post-colonial writing. There is almost every university now has an Indian writing in English paper. So these attempts are being made, but I still think that what these papers don't do enough is that they are definitely introducing literature from the Global South. They're definitely including literature from India, but there are certain things that tended to remain intact. There were certain things that remained unchallenged, primarily gender. So therefore, all the texts that we were reading, they all conformed to a very, very patriarchal understanding of what is a woman and what is a man. And all the texts were, without exception, heteronormative. So therefore, that I think is something which began to bother me. And I felt that something needed to be done to change this. So in 2009, when our university changed over to the semester system and we were expected to suggest new courses, that is when I started my new gender studies course. Now, the interesting thing is that, look how we, I think let's be a little self-reflexive. Look how colonized we are, in the sense that when I offered my new gender studies course, of the 4 units that were there, 2 units were basically of Indian origin, they're of Indian material, but the other 2 units were still Western. And originally, when I began, I think it was 3 units that were Western and 1 that was Indian. So therefore, 75% of my course still remained Western. And I was blind to even that. I thought that I was, do you see how difficult it is? On the one hand, I am trying to change, I'm trying to challenge the heteronormativity of the syllabus. But even when I'm challenging the heteronormativity of the syllabus, the texts that I'm including are still remaining by default Western. So therefore, there is a certain way in which I seem to be frustrating my own attempts at sort of decolonizing. It is decolonizing in one form, but it is recolonizing in another. This is where I think my students became very, very important. Because at the end of that course, the first time that I offered the course in 2009, at the end of the course, I distributed a survey sheet, a feedback form, in which I wanted them to tell me what they thought of the syllabus, because this is something that had never been taught at the university. So what do they make of it? And Renushi, what really struck me is that there were a lot of students who were actually insisting on the inclusion of more Indian material. So they were basically saying, yes, sir, your course is very nice, but we just don't think that there is enough Indian material. Could we please have more Indian material? So that I thought was an eye-opener for me. And I realized where I was going wrong. So now the course has got about 50-50 component of Western and Indian material. Now, the much more important point over here is how did the students take the course? What you would be interested to know is that after the course began, the overwhelmingly the overwhelming amount of questions and queries came from the women students. The men stayed away. The men would be at the back of the class. They would not be asking the questions. It would always be the women. Very few men students actually came up to me and asked me questions. And I was very disturbed by it. I was very troubled by this idea. So why, I was very happy that the women were asking me questions, but I was very disturbed that the men were not. And that is when I began to realize that my course was making men deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And it was making the women extremely happy, because I was suddenly talking about things that they were pining to hear, but nobody was telling them. I was talking about sex in a way in which it had never been talked about in class. I was talking about consent. I was talking about sexual pleasure, about things that they could never imagine could be discussed in class. And incidentally, my course began a few days after the first decriminalization of homosexuality in India. So in India, we have a very peculiar history. In India, homosexuality was first decriminalized. Oh, I see. Okay. So therefore, what is happening is that, India first decriminalized homosexuality in 2009 on the 3rd of July. And then it was decriminalized again in 2018. The first time it was done by the Delhi High Court. The second time, the much more summary decriminalization was done by the Supreme Court. So there was a lot of talk about sexuality in the newspapers, and I advised the students to come to the class with the newspapers. I felt that whereas the women students were extremely they were at ease discussing, that is very counterintuitive, because in South Asia, women are usually, we think about women as being quiet. Women are not allowed to talk about sexuality. Women are not to talk about their sexual experiences. But in my class, it was the exact opposite. It was the women who were doing so much more talking. They were bringing their personal anecdotes to the class, but the men had clamped up. I'm sorry, you'll just have to tell me when my time is up so that I can stop.
I think we can wrap up.
Right. Okay. Okay. So therefore, what's interesting is that now that I've been teaching this course now for about 12 to 13 years, I have found that that pattern has remained pretty much unchanged. It is still the women students who ask me the questions. It is still the men who stay away. And I think that my only explanation for this is that I think men are staying away because it is continuing to cause a lot of discomfort, and I'm glad that I'm producing the discomfort because it is necessary. And I think that there are some men students who are actually recognizing how they are complicit in the way in which patriarchy has been functioning in Indian society. And I think that is something which is making them uncomfortable, but they're also being self-reflexive. So I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you, Professor Niladri. I wish we had more time to, get deeper into it, but hopefully we'll have more time at the second session, and most of your insights and patterns of colonial thinking and approaches that you referred to, I think is not just in India, it's also relevant to, Sri Lanka and the South Asian region as a whole. So yeah, so I'd like to get into our third speaker for the session, Mr. Imtiaz Pavel Neil. Welcome to the session, and let me just give a brief introduction to him. Yeah, so Neil is the gender and social change communications admirer and programmer, in addition to also being a filmmaker. He is the founder and convener of Mirror Institute for Art and Justice and Men for Peace, Equality and Justice. He represents Bangladesh at the MenEngage Alliance and is a steering committee member of Sanam. He has also authored and curated a number of photography, film, and other art forms exhibitions, in addition to the other achievements that you see on the screen. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead with the question. Neil, we would like to know, how has colonial constructions of power manifested in art and filmmaking? Mr. Neil, you...
Hi, yeah, I was unmuting me. Hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you, Niladri. You have been really communicative all through. And I would also start thanking our first mate presenting, Bandhana, for making the course very simple through storytelling, and not only storytelling, telling stories of personal, personal facing of harsh realities under this extremely colonial South Asia, where what is not colonized is the question actually, and colonized realm is the only thing that is stamped out to be perfect, and all the other things, all the other stuff, all the other processes are questioned to be, queer or non-conforming or actually degrading. In this realm, my story begins. I'll be trying to sort of be containing to the time allocated for me, but I have to also tell a little bit of story how I end up in this journey of analyzing and programming for critical social change through more non-linear ways, different forms of art, literary art, from literary art to performing, from visual art to, I also call, physical art. And film is one of the complex forms of it, containing at least 7 of the major art forms. And for film is not for name, fame, or money, but film is really to materialize my really big social change dreams and goals, primarily for the land where I reside, but also for greater Indian subcontinent, greater South Asia, Asia, and beyond, focusing global sound and actually beyond. So, to me, actually, this Bangladesh is celebrating its 50th anniversary of independence this year, and this actually marks that to me it gives me that the sense that in terms of recognizing the colonial hangovers, it's very difficult for me to even tell where we are staying at this point when already we are crossing half a century, because since my childhood, since my birth, I was born in a family which was like half very much indigenous. My father was a dark, small, and indigenous riverine island a person, whereby my mother was from Indians, migrated here, who were from jamindars, landlords, who are, they are orders of colonial family-wise um, uh, hangovers were all through during my and also in my family, motherly norms were very dominant, like as she was she as she was seen, and also she also tried to also portray that the cultural aspects, and then all the other social aspects, familial aspects that she came with are much more acceptable socially. And that's why again this was the mother who made me, who introduced me to the world of art on one hand, and on the other hand, world of services, critical services to everyone who are in distress. This was the very mother, but then at the same time, the mother, as well as my father and everyone in the family, was very much concerned about how they make their girlish looking so-called male body son, make it suitable for this world. And in Bangla, there's a saying called "Shokter Bhakto Noromer Jom." So people here are love the hard ones, and they are the killers for the ones who are soft. So that was that was the phrase always hanging on my top, and I was from my father's initiative, I was constantly tried to turn into a proper man, a boy that could survive, not the weak, soft-spoken, girlish boy. So from that reality, I actually started growing up, and I was growing up as an artist, as a musician, painter, actor. At the same time, I was very much passionate into services for distress, and so that I was in the Cub Scout, Boy Scout, Red Crescent, all these, and I also start when I couldn't study. I was not allowed to study in fine arts, which was my top dream, but because of a eldest son from a middle class family, I was basically told that you have to do your graduation very quickly and get into jobs in earning, because your father has less than 4 years term. So I had to go to my second choice to study social science. Actually, I studied social work, and from the very beginning, I became very much active, more into social theories for change. On the other hand, I took camera as my paintbrush. I started doing photography and gradually into cinematography and filmmaking, and putting all my artworks together. I was preparing myself as an expression, as an art expressionist. And then actually, I was lucky to be part of, at the one side, for my study, I was part of this movement of Beijing Women's Conference. I was the only male body in this preparatory process, with a huge amount of our feminist leaders of that time, South Asian feminist leader. I had to never look back from this feminist processes since that early 90s. And on the other hand, I was basically introduced to this man. I don't know whether you can see him. This is this is Paulo Freire, Sir Paulo Freire, who was from, you know, Brazil, and his groundbreaking theory of pedagogy for oppressed. And later on, I was introduced to this another of his Paulo Freire's successor, called Sir Augusto Boal, who did the processes for theater for oppressed. So these two things, pedagogy of oppressed and theater for oppressed, from both from Brazil and global South, actually empowered my thinking to unimaginably, unexplainably high level, and put me on the position of conflict in the engagements that I was doing. I was primarily engaged with local, national, international organizations in the works on HIV, SRHR, SGBV, gender-based violence, and all these things. But then there was this process of introducing, you know, you all remember with this new millennium coming, all the national and international organizations were reshaping into a rights-based organization. They are talking big on rights, social justice, and soon after that they also started talking about social change, which actually really lured me in terms of okay, now actually whatever we have been trying to achieve in terms of social justice or gender justice would never be materialized if we cannot have the unfair social norms change around us. And that's why this right ways approach, as well as this social change approach and empowerment approach, were very much liked by me. But then, very unfortunately, I found that I am becoming an sort of an enemy of the, not the state yet, but enemy of my organizations that I was connected with, because they were not liking the seriousness that I used to show in terms of social change. Because I found that, you know, I was in this you know, critical behavior change communication for more than a decade by then, but then I was never happy with the terminal outcomes, superficial outcomes that those actions and programmings are producing. So I was very much into this greater social change analysis, as you know, the socio-ecological processes of encompassing all the levels, from starting from self to you know, community, family to community, institutions, and all the realms, until or unless we engage our analysis and programming and movement building in terms of that, we cannot. So that actually put me in real trouble. I had to quit job in 2012, and I became a film activist and maker from 2012, when I gave birth to the organization called Mirror Institute for Art and Justice, and also the platform called Mirror Men for Peace, Equality, Justice. Because already the work on our work on masculinities were on, and that was giving me a lot of hope, with not only with MenEngage, but also as Sanam, South Asian Network of Addressing Masculinity, actually was really really giving me a lot of courage that I can fight. I can go for my solitary fights with very few of my South Asian and international friends. So that actually gave me the courage, and I started becoming really, you know, at that time I became free. I started facing hardship, economic hardship, and all this. But one thing that was really really beautiful was the freedom that I started getting. And from then onwards, I was looking for ways how basically this social change programming that very much requires the journey from self through the society through to other level of social things. And there I actually got the opportunity of re-looking into this, these entities, as you Alan Fakir from Bangladesh, and then Bulle Shah from, I would say, Punjab and Pakistan, and then of course Kabir Das um, from India, Indian
Thank you.
subcontinent. Yeah,
If we
my
can
time is
also
getting.
start wrapping up, yes.
We'll
Unfortunately,
wrap
yes.
up. I'm sure that I'll get another opportunity, right?
Yes,
To
of course, of course.
come back.
We
So,
can speak more on.
to give you the thing is that I found that this colonializing gender atmosphere that I was born into and I grew up into, and I ventured into my work engagement and till date, and the way the state is functioning and the society is functioning, social norms are functioning. It is like an ocean, and we are like the insect, not even fishes or any oceaning, and we are like the insect in the ocean, so vulnerable. So in that cases, our if until or unless if our approaches are not strong enough, our approaches are not comprehensive enough, then we are basically very soon we will lose out. That's why this art based programming analysis and programming I took. Film is one of them, and uh, within that actually basically we are looking into deeper social norms and the way that social norm has been in place in our conscious and unconscious brain processes, in our family processes and other processes, that has been looked into and being addressed. I shall come back in my second spell. Thanks, Renushi, for the reminder, and thanks again for listening.
No worries, Neil. Thank you. Those were some very valuable insights. We will now quickly move on to our next speaker. We have Mr. Muhammad Rafiq from Pakistan, who has joined us now to speak on this aspect further. But before we go to the question, a brief introduction as to who he is. He is a human rights and governance expert, over 15 years of experience working with democratic institutions, human rights bodies, national human rights institutions, and civil society around democratic and human rights policy reforms in Pakistan. At present, he is working as a senior human rights and advocacy expert with Democracy Reporting International. So welcome, Mr. Rafiq, to the session. With regards to our question today, please do provide us with some clarity on the impact of colonialism on the legal and governance systems in Pakistan.
Thank you, Rinushi. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm very much pleased to be part of this South Asian, very much interesting South Asian forum. I would start with my discussion with an argument that power structures equally impact. So whether they are women, working class, minorities, or whatsoever. And listening the stories of my South Asian friends, I was thinking that we are still trapped into colonization after over 70 years of independence and so. Well, coming back to my topic, in Pakistan, I must say that governance system is still works on colonial template without any structural reforms. If we look at our administrative structures, judicial system, public service delivery systems, it was basically and is broadly aimed to control the masses, not to deliver basically. Um, it results with, I argue, and you will agree with me, that it results in depriving people from accessing justice, accessing their rights, and accessing civic entitlements. Secondly, I must say that our political system is also somehow colonized because borrowed democracy from West almost could not be localized in a real sense in our countries. For example, in Pakistan, people still call it a Western model of governance. They don't own this system um, because it is captured by the patronage political elite, which was introduced and then reinforced by the Britons during their rule. It results in excluding public, even whether they are women, whether working class, all the deprived communities, minorities, to play their role in public policy discourse. So, women representation we introduced in Pakistan back in 2008 under the law ensures that we have to ensure 33% representation of women in democratic institutions. But unfortunately, it is captured by women from privileged class. Uh, on economic system in Pakistan, and I think it is replication all across South Asia, based on which was built on system developed by the Britons. Like in Pakistan, it was developed based on land ownership and canal system developed at the time. Basically, it results in strengthening patronage politics. We have a lot of feudals who have their constituencies and get elected all the times for generations. Um, in my opinion, it results in exclusion, public exclusion again from public policy discourse, and also has created nexus between market players because there's a gap. People have no interaction with political system, so it has created a gap between market players, political elite, and bureaucracy, and it makes the system exploitative basically. So. At another point, I must say on social development and political activism, it is also influenced because mostly in Pakistan, it is led by middle class, not well rooted amongst communities. That's why we remain unable to localize the human rights agenda. People do not recognize even their rights, and as well as it introduced and strengthened identity politics all around. Whether it is a movement of women's rights, it's a movement of labor rights, indigenous people's rights, child rights, and whatsoever. So it has resulted in dividing communities, weakening solidarity between marginalized groups. Um, and then I think that colonialism is continued through international financial institutions, multinational companies, bilateral and multilateral arrangements and other systems. For example, I must share that it can overall there's we face over 50% of economic share of MNCs in Pakistan. So look at these figures, and then you must be aware of Pakistan's debt trap, and on the recommendation of IMF, nowadays we are increasing all the tariff rates of electricity, gas, petrol, taxation, everything else. Basically, I think it serves the interest of colonizers and their local governing elite. And again, it is an exploitative model. So I would conclude my points that basically the colonization templates results in depriving people of their rights. It excludes them to play their role in public policy discourse, and it helps market players to exploit them. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rafiq. we'll quickly move on to our next speaker. Yeah, we have Dr. Janaki Gunavardhana from Sri Lanka. Dr. Janaki, as you can see on the screen, is a senior lecturer at the Department of History at the University of Colombo. She holds a PhD in Women's Studies from the University of York and an MPhil in History from the University of Peradeniya in Sri Lanka. Dr. Janaki, very briefly, if we can have a quick historical overview of the impact of colonization on issues concerning gender in Sri Lanka.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I can't start my video on. I think my Zoom link at university is not very stable, but I hope that's okay, right? And thanks for inviting me. Actually, I would like to talk about three things today, right? Why we can't still, do away with colonization, or rather what the previous speakers were, speaking about, how difficult it is to do away with colonization or to be decolonized, and also what that has, the impact of that on power structures in our country, societies, and also the historical situation in very brief manner. And, when we in the 20th and 19th century nationalisms, emerged in our countries, wanted to do away with imperialism, but what we can see is that they did not want to do away with the structures that came with colonization, which actually are based on the philosophical, theoretical, and conceptual, understanding in the modern age. So modernity was accepted as the norm for being civilized. So actually what the colonial rulers did was, one of the things was criticizing our own economic, cultural, social structures, and and political structures, and wanted to impose their own structures on our countries based on the knowledge that has been produced in the modern period or modern age of Europe. So, I mean, even if you look at the concept of gender, right, presented by the UN itself, what you can see is our way of understanding gender is very much based on that knowledge produced in the modern age of Europe, which is actually, based on classical liberal understanding of sex, sexuality, and sexual mores in those societies. I mean, if you look at the UN concept of gender, it talks about equality between men and women, boys and girls, which actually are the sex categories deconstructed by the concept gender, right? So what I see in, like, I was, and I have been engaged with few activist groups in Sri Lanka about, talking about gender. And my experience is that even the people who are working for, achieving equality, equity in our countries are actually, influenced by our understanding of what gender is. Like, we have this culturally, biologically, biological body, which is natural, and gender has been grafted on that, which is wrong, right? So what I see is, like, when we are working for gender equality and equity, we tend to forget other genders or other sexualities, sex categories. And much of the work is more focused on women rather than other categories. And I think it's one of the reasons. Like, for example, I remember in one of the meetings, one lady who is affiliated to the UN said, women have special needs. And I was thinking, what special needs we have apart from men, other than, need of the sanitary pads, right? So we have this understanding that we have different needs, which is wrong again, I think. So this type of understanding limits our courage to question culture and traditions that are, based on patriarchal values, norms, and, ideologies. We don't question that in our societies. Even the people who are working for gender equity and equality in our countries. So, and also the other thing I wanted to talk about is like the nationalist movements emerged in the early 20th century to do away with imperialism, actually, sort of absorbed certain knowledges from the West to understand our own societies. Now, one thing is that, what the imperial rulers did, especially the British, in our countries, was to categorize and classify us into communities, ethnic, race, caste, etc. So our identities were reconstituted in that time, and many pre-colonial human institutions, practices, and behaviors in our countries were ignored and muted. And my own research shows that, we had like more shared cultural practices than being very separate, communities. It was, if you look at not only South Asia, Southeast Asia also, right? This vast geographical region. Even the term South Asia is a colonial term. It was invented by the colonial rulers, right? So that understanding, that official understanding by the colonizers was actually taken by us to understand our own societies. That's where I think the social hierarchies, inequalities are still prevailing in our societies. And the ideological formations in that period, even with the nationalist leaders and nationalist movements, is very much, as I have said, inculcated the knowledge produced in the West about who men and women are and who we are, right? So the power structures in society, state, and family is very much governed by that, right? It's not that women don't have power in societies, we are not powerless, but the power we have is an authoritarian power. Men have the power to make decisions, authority power. Women have the power to limit things. It's women who actually tell in the family and society, this is not good to do, this is not the way to behave, etc. Right? And the other thing I wanted to talk about, when we look at the historical situation, actually, what we can see is a more liberal, fluid society on sex, sexuality, and sexual mores. So we are very much influenced by the Victorian British traditions on sex, sexuality, and sexual mores. And we think that most of these, practices we have in society today are coming from ancient cultures, which is not. My own research has been, has revealed that to me. Like, for example, someone was talking about shame and honor, right? So the practice in our societies today is to conceal menstruation, for example. But in ancient times, in Sri Lanka, women used to tell the strangers who approach home that they are menstruating, because menstruation was not affiliated with shame and honor, but with taboos. So likewise, our marriage, our cultural mores, our sexuality were very much like changed by the colonial intervention, and we still carry on with these structures, and we didn't want to do away with that. Okay, this is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Janaki. So let's quickly move on to our sixth speaker. Yeah, so we have Kalpani Gunavardhana from Sri Lanka, who will be speaking on a a different aspect regarding decolonization, especially with regards to standards of beauty and similar aspects. But before I hand it over to her, let me quickly introduce her. So she is a model, up-and-coming actress and small business owner, consultant, and advocate. Kalpani has worked in media for over a decade and is passionate about advocating for diverse media representation and creation. Access, visibility, and inclusion are core areas of focus in her advocacy, and she works on bringing multiple dimensional stories to life, especially on women as a creative. Kalpani also has a background in fashion, law, business, social work, event management, PR, talent management, storytelling, and media solutions. She's also a Women in Leadership Fellow of 2021 from Sri Lanka through the British Council. Kalpani, the floor is yours. If you could very briefly comment on how colonial are beauty standards in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Renushi. If I can preface this conversation following Ms. Rana, most young men and boys understand beauty standards to be cosmetic, without saying that these are deeply rooted, gendered, systemic situations and injustices, and how colonization also plays a part in it. And I'll elaborate on this a little more. But I also intersect with Mr. Neil as to why is a model, speaking of diverse media representation, why is someone who studied law modeling, doing something so superficial? Beauty ideas, agency, empowerment is very poorly understood. And I'll touch upon this again on the second round as to why I'm even here today and having this conversation with you. To answer your question, Renushi, yes, when we look at our media, Eurocentric features are favored, and we do take notes from Northern India and Western media. However, the advent of social media has heavily impacted this, and we are seeing an overlap on trends such as Foxeye. For those who don't know of Foxeye, it's a trend of using makeup to make your eyes look more slanted. So it's East Asian features in a Eurocentric setting. And we are seeing that happening even in Sri Lanka. And another interesting trend that we're observing is the impact of K-pop and Korean dramas on beauty standards in Sri Lanka. Because usually when we speak of, let's say, colorism, we immediately go to colonized aspects. But praxis tells us that the narrative has changed. It is still colonial, but like, as Dr. Janaki said, we need to look beyond the global south, so to say, for intersection, and also to ensure that we look at unique trends. And I use the word praxis because we solely lack data. And again, on the second round, I'll elaborate as to why we lack data to begin with. And further to this, I think we need to look beyond the colonial influence as well to redefine and unpack our complex identities, because, you know, if you go way back, from dark versus light to superficial to religion to culture, has told us certain beauty ideals are better, or in a karmic sense, you've been blessed, or that it's a black cat is evil or a bad omen, for example. So we need to critically reflect. And also, I would like to sort of end this segment with a question as to why I have even found a niche or a platform to speak to start with. Because when I started modeling here, it was purely because there was a perceived similarity to Naomi Campbell. And this intersection is so crucial because she's British, of black heritage, and yet I'm being compared to her, and that's the only reason why I even got my foot in the door, so to say. And also, like, am I thin? Am I tall? Do I have features that might be considered to fit into beauty ideals? And as Mr. Rafiq said, I critically reflect on the fact that I have a platform because of privilege. I'm able to converse, critique, and engage in discourse because of privilege. So I'll end it there and I'll pick it up for the second round. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Kalpani. Yes, you certainly did. Thank you. So before we go to the next round, where we would primarily discuss ways forward for South Asia and recommendations by the speakers, just to quickly, in a nutshell, wrap up what our first round dealt with. So our first speaker basically spoke about how this colonial pervasiveness, for the lack of a better term, manifests in everyday life and in various aspects of society. And then we had Professor Chatterjee comment on his experience on how colonial patterns really manifest in academia and pedagogy in India. And then we had Mr. Neil talk about, how they manifest in art and filmmaking, and the need for non-conventional thinking and non-linear processes. And Mr. Rafiq then, went into a summary of how the impact of colonization has had on the legal and governance systems in Pakistan. And of course, Dr. Janaki had a brief historical overview on the impact of colonization on matters concerning gender in Sri Lanka. And Kalpani finally spoke to us about the colonial, how deeply ingrained these colonial standards are when it comes to how we define beauty in countries like Sri Lanka. So we would quickly go into the second round of questions. Due to limited time, I request all the speakers to speak briefly for 5 minutes each. Let me start with Ms. Rana once again. If I were to ask you, is Miss? Yeah, she's here. Okay. So if I were to ask you, Ms. Rana, about the role of Cedaw as a legally binding framework to strengthen accountability for gender transformative change in social and economic sectors, what are your thoughts on this matter?
Thank you, Renushi, and thank you for bringing up Cedaw, because I think it is very contextual here. First of all, I've really been enriched with the diverse deliberations. As I said, this is my first discourse on decolonization, so I feel very, very enriched. You bring up Cedaw, and I feel that in order to uproot the deep-rooted colonization impact, particularly in the context of gendered norms and values, I think the Cedaw can play a very, very powerful role. And it has been playing a powerful role, in fact. Cedaw, I don't know how many of you would know, is a convention, UN convention. It's the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And all the South Asian countries have ratified it. It's an obligatory legal framework, and member states are obliged to implement its mandate. And through the Cedaw committee, we have been addressing, not directly termed as decolonization, but in many terms, asking member states to reform their laws, talking about plural laws, the machineries that are required to bring about that gender transformation, talking about quota, reservation through temporary special measures, violence against women, engaging men and boys. We talk a lot. Initially, we did not talk about engaging men and boys, but recently there's been more increase in asking member states whether they have any programs on engaging men and boys, about demystifying masculinity, what have they been their outreach. So that's another area that we've been addressing. And the other is participation of women in national public lives, in parliament, in international arena. Nationality is a big topic, the rights of the mothers to transmit the citizenship to their children. Education, this is again an area which is extremely important, because in many countries, women are still not free to pursue the area of education they would want to, or they are segregated as well. So this is something that Cedaw brings up and continuously urges state parties to have a very open education system for girls and boys as well. Access to health services, sexual and reproductive health, rights of minorities, including LBTI, sexual minorities, the right to choose a vocation, discrimination on remunerations, the equal pay for equal work of equal value, lots of amenities, facilities, family rights, the rights within a family, the rights of a divorcee. I mean, these may not look like it has direct connotation to the manifestations of colonization. But if you look into it deeper, I think it does have the remnants of colonization, which is being tackled by Cedaw. And how does Cedaw do this? Is because every countries have to report to the Cedaw Committee every 4 years on how they are implementing, on the progress they have made in the implementation of the 16 substantive articles related to what I have earlier said. And the committee actually has a constructive face-to-face dialogue with the government delegation, asking questions in where the gaps are perceived, and then on the basis of the dialogue, framing a set of recommendations that the government needs to implement in the coming 4 years. I do say this because I feel in the context of Nepal, even before I was in the Cedaw committee, we have been using Cedaw in our movement building for women's rights, for equality, and a lot of policies have been influenced through the concluding observations or the recommendations given by the Cedaw Committee to the state party. For example, even our new constitution, the constitution of 2015, engendering the constitution has been on the basis of the mandate given by the Cedaw Committee, which was brought up very vehemently by the civil society. Recently, Chaupadi is a traditional system where girls are isolated in a cowshed during their menstruation. There's a lot of stigma, taboo related to it. And the Cedaw Committee had asked Nepal to criminalize this kind of practice. And Nepal, because of the pressure created by the suggestion given by the Cedaw Committee and the civil society, did pass this law criminalizing such practices. These are just some examples. So what I feel is Cedaw is a powerful mechanism through its mandatory reporting mechanism, where you have to consistently appear before the Cedaw Committee to report the progress and to report on the initiatives taken to fill the gaps that have been pointed out. I think this is a perspective that I can look at in terms of addressing the deep-rooted impact of colonization as well. So I would urge civil society, I would urge government entities to look into it from a perspective of the mandate provided by Cedaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gunavardhana. Those were some very valuable insights. So thank you again for joining and speaking to us today. I'd now like to move on to Professor Niladri. If we can quickly speak about how, with regards to the field of academia and pedagogy, what are some ways to decolonize what we understand as wisdom or knowledge, perhaps from an epistemic point of view, through pedagogical approaches?
Okay, I think I'm actually not going to take too much time. I'll just very simply say that I think the most difficult part of my teaching, what I found, is that I think, there is a certain kind of liberal acceptance that I now see when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to even LGBT rights. Many of my students, for example, they are very, very happy to take part in the Pride Walk that we have in Kolkata, which is where I am, every year. So lots of students participate. That somehow does not seem to be the problem anymore. It becomes a problem when I talk about certain issues like marriage, when I talk about certain issues like what exactly is love, how is love very often sort of, misrecognized as being a kind of ownership, a kind of proprietorship. I love you, therefore I own you. I love you, therefore your body is my property. When these difficult conversations happen, that is when I find that the students become extremely defensive. And that is when I have to remember again that that is not the way in which, in South Asia, love was regarded. Love used to be a little bit more expansive than that. So therefore, this whole patriarchal kind of containment of love within a structure where bodies are owned by each other, that I think is the real. I mean, I've got students who are walking out of the class because they simply cannot take what I have to say about marriage, that it is basically an institution that is deeply patriarchal and inequality is built into the structure of marriage, no matter how you look at it. So therefore, when it comes to sort of social public rights, I find that my students are extremely enthusiastic and very supportive. But when it comes to recognizing how they are patriarchal in their own lived experiences, when I train the lens on themselves, and when I ask them, how are you dealing with your romantic relationships? How do you feel about marriage? That is when I find that people become very, very defensive. So I think that is a hurdle that we really need to overcome. And that is something which I find is a real challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Niladri. Let me quickly move on to Mr. Rafiq. If we can have a few recommendations on, transforming legal and the governance system in a way that would actively challenge colonial power structures.
Okay. I have 4 or 5 points. I'll take much lesser time. I'll try to link my discussion points with previous explanations. As I said and pointed out to the issues that colonization has fractured our solidarity of primarily the vulnerable communities. It resulted in exclusion, exploitation, and deprivation in many ways all across South Asia. Or I'm not aware where it happens everywhere, and we must see other examples as well. When I look at South Asia, we see these examples. There are ultimate issues of exclusion, exploitation, deprivation, and all these issues are due to our fractured solidarity. So my recommendations to the civil society and political actors would be to let's revisit the social and political activism models, because we need to make it closer to the people. We need to localize the rights agenda. We need to consolidate social and political issues, uh, whether their issues are related to the women's, related to other sections of the society. We need to consolidate and create solidarity between societies of marginalized communities. So this is my first point. Secondly, I'd like to recommend that we need to build our ask to ensure proportionate representation of communities in democratic systems. For example, in Pakistan, we have electables. We have no representation. Even working class in Pakistan has, which is accounted for 2/3 of the country's population. They don't have representation in democratic institution. We have women representation, but it is, as I said, captured by the women of elite class. So we need to build ask against these practices, ensure representation, because if these people have representation in democratic institutions, they will be better able to look at the policy and frame policies which are pro poor, even at national, subnational, or local levels. My third point would be to let's develop and advocate for pro people governance reforms. It is very much essential, because and and in recent developments in public policy says that we can deal with all these issues by empowering people. So our broader aim should be any public policy designing and delivery should be to empower the people. So we have to look and take an in-depth review of our policies and systems all across South Asia and try to reform them on around the principle of empowering the people. My fourth point is that given that there is a strong nexus between market player and other governing elite and bureaucracy, we need to break this cycle, break this nexus. We need to engage with parliamentary systems. We need to engage with political parties, political players, democracy actors. So we should influence. We may be able to influence the public policies, making it pro people. And my fifth point would be to find local ways of our economic issues because colonization still is continued, as I said, in the shape of IFIs and multinationals and other staffs. So we need to find a local solution to our economic problems. It will help us overcome our challenges and lead us to a sustainable future. Thank you very much. If anyone of you have any questions, I'll be here to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Rafiq. And yes, we will welcome some questions towards the end of the session as well. I'd now like to welcome Neil once again for his thoughts on non-conventional or new ways of addressing this critical aspect of decolonizing the arts.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute and start talking. So, as this would be a continuation of what I started saying in terms of a little bit of storytelling. Why I am and Mirror Institute is in this movement, because here not only colonialized gender realm, but also in the overall aggressive, like hysterically aggressive and destructive forms of ambiences that we have adapted from individually, family-wise, and socially. This is not affecting girls and women more severely than ever before, but also we know what is happening with our nature itself. How, like country Delta, a very much endangered Delta, Bangladesh. You know, even last 2 weeks, I was traveling in both diagonally each point in Bangladesh, where I mean people are suffering with the basic amenities of like water and agriculture, like health, and women are at the forefront at the suffering, and you know, gender-based violence and everything is exponentially rising now, and this is a reality where you know, masculinism and militarism is not only in the state apparatus as well as in the military. It has transcended into the levels of individuals and family. Now each family, either father, in his absence the mother, in his absence the elder brother, or in his absence the husband or the wife, they become the military ruler, as Niladri said, the owners, the controllers, the punishers, the humiliators. This is the day-to-day conventions through which our children are growing. And Miro Institute for Art and Justice found that, you know, as we everything that we have learned, all this violence that we have faced, learned, and adapted within our attitude and behavior has not come linearly through just, you know, linear ways. So we have learned non-linearly since our birth. So the programming that has to be meant to address this has to be non-linear as well as complex. That's why this arts-based programming that we are talking is so important, whereby the state is promoting, the state is funding the art which are tricky as well as superficial at the same time, again as a tool to tame and control. Where the art that we are talking about, the analytical art, the analytical artistic analysis, programming, and movement building that we are talking about is really really challenged. But this is a very high time we do that. But for that, we are basically bringing together not only academia, but also academia, artists, and activists. Not all of them, but the ones whose heart constantly cries at the violence that not only girls and women face disproportionately, but everyone else is facing at an increased state. So for that, actually, our approach of not only the jargonic social change that I am talking about, but for the social change programming using art, we are basically prioritizing the self-analysis. So basically, when you say self, it's not very difficult. It is hard, but it's not difficult. It's possible. Everyone we are promoting, and that's why actually this Mirror Institute thing actually I showed in the beginning that all of these very they are recognized by the general people, but they are not recognized by the colonized or neo-colonizing authorities. But they very vividly said why the self has to be inquired on a continuous basis, on a not only everyday basis, almost every moment basis. We have to look into ourselves. We have to analyze ourselves, and through that we have to know the boundary, the inner nature that is inside us, and the separated by that is the skin, and then the outer nature, and then the proper analysis, proper vigilation of that can lead us to find out our own ways, and then of course the collective ways to resist the processes, state supported process of very painful anti-knowledge and anti-wisdom society and self-building processes that is happening all across South Asia. I have traveled in 35 countries, including South Asia, a number of times, and I've seen the same process. As days are going by, the more anti-knowledge and anti-wisdom processes are basically coming upon us in the name of this consumerized, corporated, as well as these neo-modern realities. And to address that, we have to rediscover the children, the very free children that was born, who was extremely creative and extremely imaginative. But now that very children says, oh, my friend is an artist. I'm not an artist. My friend is an artist who actually display his or her artworks in the galleries or make a film. But we have to reclaim the artist in every being, not only in the panelists or the participant, but also everyone has that potential to reclaim the child inside them and connect with them in a rejuvenated way, in a very serious way, that it is not like a conventional educational or conventional linear empowerment system that is necessary. It is really complex and comprehensive, self-driven, self-analytical system that has to be in place. Then we actually can have the scratches and then later on meaningful dance over this highly colonized, gendered realities and realm in our country, as well as beyond in South Asia and every places. And I would like to really thank Kalpani, Niladri, Rana, Rafiq, and every other Janaki and every other fellow, because they are pointing out, have been really off the ground and made my position very well located. Thank you very much, and look forward to the questions. Bye.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. I would like to lastly invite Kalpani once again to comment on her thoughts on what steps can be taken to deconstruct, reframe, and redefine a somewhat complicated relationship with standards of beauty, and what your thoughts are on this matter.
Thank you again, Janusha, and thank you, Neil, and to everyone. I've learned so much just from today. First and foremost, we need to move beyond looking at it as a cosmetic issue, because as you know, there are laws elsewhere, for example, in the UK, where the Advertising Standards Authority used research which showed that what you see on media leads to unequal gender outcomes. And it's this research that has led to laws, self-governance in the UK, right? I'm going to use examples from colorism from Sri Lanka because that's where I started first, I think, in terms of advocacy, because again, lived experience and what I experienced within the industry. For example, in Sri Lanka, we have zero laws when it comes to skin whitening, right? Like glutathione, it goes as food. It's not regulated in any sense. So should it be seen as a public health concern? Where does policy come in? So we really need to move beyond, oh, this is a cosmetic thing, it's a personal choice. Why is it such a big deal? Sort of understanding, especially between young men and boys, I think. And in Sri Lanka, we have a huge unregulated market showing skin changes in 2 to 3 weeks, which is very likely to have high levels of mercury. We have no idea what's in these concoctions. And also, however, we need to understand that it is a social currency. There is something called pretty privilege. So I tend to look at systems. Yes, I do work on ground in the sense, most digitally, digital activism, with communities, with young women to have these conversations. And as an earlier speaker mentioned, privilege is a question here. Because who do you start speaking to? Do I go to the grassroots levels when I have the privilege to move beyond these social structures, to move beyond this bias and be able to even be here and have this conversation? So where do I start? And I've chosen to start in the middle, where I speak to people that immediately relate to me. So privilege can come with power, and you can use that power to make social change. And I also heavily focus on the systems in place, especially corporates. In terms of decolonization, to quote an activist called Seema Hari, the Western gaze had to turn towards us because of Black Lives Matters to even recognize that skin whitening lotions are a systemic issue, that colorism is connected to racism. That's why we suddenly started having these name changes from Fair and Lovely to Glow and Lovely. Even though, especially in India, there's been so many campaigns, activists has been working for decades on Dark is Beautiful, but Unilever, as in HUL, Hindustan Unilever chairman, said the timing of rebranding was purely coincidental. When he was asked this question, he said it had nothing to do with Black Lives Matter. So then I would ask, why are those products still in the market then, if this was such a planned sort of procedure? So who's going to hold them accountable? Do we have the power to hold them accountable? Because Unilever sells Dove and inclusion and real beauty to the West, and they sold us white beauty and Fair and Lovely. So where is global accountability? And that's why I said that we need to connect as the global South, as defined by the colonizers themselves, but we also need to look beyond it and connect across cohorts, across the regions, so that we can learn from each other. Because in Africa, Fair and Lovely was rebranded very long time ago to something else. Again, it's under those same sort of marketing principles, where it wasn't driven by ethical concerns or moral concerns. So where do we draw the line? And also in terms of drawing the line, do we ask policies and laws to intervene? Because we live in a capitalist system. So then we have that contradiction between free market policies and government intervention. And how do we reframe this in order to understand that we need intervention, maybe at a public policy level as a public health concern, or because it's leading to unequal gender outcomes? If you signed up for sustainable development goals, you're in direct violation. So we need our civil societies to come together to understand this, I think. And I'm also going to quickly go into a personal story if I have time, Renushi, if that's okay.
Yes,
Yeah?
that's
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
Thank you. So I studied in the UK, and in Sri Lanka, we are raised to call everyone sir and madam, or, you know, Mr. So and so. And it might be seen as a colonized sort of aspect, but then there's a cultural overlap as well, because we use words like elder sister, elder brother, everybody's an uncle, everybody's an auntie. And when I was in university, I was told over and over again, don't use the term sir. And I even lost a job because of it, because at the final round, the feedback was that you refer to everyone as sir and madam, and, you know, we see you as a subservient woman. We are worried that your team will see you as a subservient woman. And at that point, I was too young to understand. But now I will take a stand and say that we do not need packaged liberation from the Western lens to be told to us. We need to work within our post-colonial complex identities to unpack it without taking, like what the other speakers said, research from the West or the Western gaze in itself to understand what's happening on ground. And earlier I said praxis because we don't have data. I have been invalidated every single step of the way and dismissed because I don't have data. But why don't I have data? I've been working in advocacy for at least half a decade. I've been very vocal about things. This is the first fellowship I've received for my advocacy work. Again, why? It's connected to Black Lives Matter. Again, because the Western lens suddenly turned towards these issues. And maybe that's the same reason why we don't have data. We have market research data to sell something, but we don't have on-ground data or research, possibly, again, for the same reasons. And it's not like you can put your lived experience on a CV as an academic qualification. So how are you going to qualify for these grants and programs? And also, we are not a monolith. Often stats from India is quoted to me, and I'm like, it's not the same thing. Yes, we are interconnected. Yes, we have intersectional identities, but we have unique realities on ground where we need separate identification of data. And beyond that, what more can we do? Do we look at self-governance, maybe within the media sector? Do we need India's help, or do we need regional support? For example, Unilever Sri Lanka is a subsidiary, a direct subsidiary of Hindustan Unilever. They directly control as to what happens here. You can look up, I mean, for example, even right now, it's still up on Economic Times of India, of a horrific article of Moon, of Fair and Lovely, where they converted rural communities into buying Fair and Lovely. So is this marketing, or has there been fundamental violations of laws or morality, or what they espouse elsewhere? So what are the laws that separate within legal structures where London can announce suddenly that we are no longer using terms as fair or lovely, or because it's not equal or it's not right, and on ground something else is still happening even after their announcement. So I will end with that, because like Dr. Janaki said, we were separated by colonial structures. We need to come together in order to globally solve these issues together. So thank you.
Thank you, Kalpani. That was extremely valuable. Thank you for sharing your insights. I would actually like to extend, if you could remain, we do have a question, I believe, directed at you. We have a question from Sabine saying, I am interested to know if you have done something to challenge these beauty standards. We can address that question and then move towards some of the comments that were posted earlier for the other speakers to contribute. Kalpani?
Yes, thank you for the question. So first of all, I looked at visibility. Even though I have, let's say, a background in law, I have businesses, I have another income source. So thus I didn't have to depend on modeling. And it was always a question, why are you modeling? Why are you modeling? Because visibility matters, because being seen matters, because I had that privilege of working in England, where as a model as well, where that conversation was happening in 2004, and I was back here in Sri Lanka in 2013, and I was still being told, why don't you wear contact lenses? Why don't you color your hair? I absolutely refused to. I maintained my hair black, and I started working through the system with people that would come together, because there are people. I have a very supportive agency, and over the years, I've been on international films. We've won multiple awards. So first of all, as I said, visibility. Then in terms of questioning these structures, yes, we are in direct discourse within the industry. I sit in industry panels. I work with agencies in order to develop better media, diverse and inclusive media. And tertiarily, I do series called Talk a Mile. If it wasn't, I had to add that I have lupus. So the pandemic has compromised me. Lupus is an autoimmune condition. If not, my original plan was to go and cover every mile of Sri Lanka and have conversations with women. So currently I'm doing it digitally. And at the moment we are unpacking colorism. And because we need to start somewhere. So that's where I started. Thank you. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Kalpani. Let's just take a look at some of the questions and comments. And those who have joined us right now, you are more than welcome to unmute and speak to the panelists about any questions or even comments that you would like to share with us. I'm also wondering if David Meager, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, if you'd like to unmute and speak. I see that you've had a comprehensive comment on the chat box. Would you like to present any questions to the panelists?
Yes, I would like to know what their perspective is of second generation, we call, or the recognized political term for it is BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, although this has just been discounted in a report by the government on Black, Asian, minority people who live in communities. How can we help to understand our own white privilege and the fact that we are wearing, should I say, the clothes of white habitus, because this is all steeped in imperialism and the Christianity, missionary, and all those kind of areas where we've been brainwashed to a certain extent from generation to generation. And this is also what brought this to mind was the fact that somebody said something about politicians, how politicians are almost shielded away from any kind of recognition or understanding of what colonialism has done in the past, because it's just been passed down from family to family, and these people are in seats of power that are never changing, and therefore they've never understood what white privilege is, because they don't understand that, for example, people that live as second generation Asians or Afro-English, if you like, have their own habitus, which is in the minority. In other words, white habitus is something that we adopt as white. We have no recognition of what minority groups are, and we actually exclude them because of that. So how can we shed our white habitus? And that's what really I'm asking. So because I've just written something about this, I just wonder what the panel thought about that, because it would help kind of restore the balance, because we've had statues ripped out and thrown into the sea and so on because of the way that philanthropists have now, the minority groups here have understood that philanthropists are on statues, on paintings, and so on, are displayed, and they're just really they weren't philanthropists because we carried out atrocities. There was the East India Company, for example, that went into Southern Asia with its own army and coerced leaders in those days to take and to sell perhaps cheap products, which were really quite exotic things to take back, tea, fine china, and all those kind of things, and silk and so on, at minor cost and at cost to the people in India and Bangladesh and Myanmar and places like that. And so they've realized that, and we're realizing it now. So we need to remove this white habitat. We need to break the chain of our colonial outlook, which has been passed down from generation to generation. It's in most British people's psyche. I hope you got that. I haven't really constructed it very well. But,
can I respond quickly?
Yeah.
Can I respond? Hey, hello, David. Nice to hear from you. Yes, I'm not responding to you fully, but one of my very, very favorite lecture that I'm really proud to see is that our queer professor, Rain Collins from Sydney, she delivered at LSE, London School of Economics, on decolonizing gender. Actually really, really answers many of your concerns, because it's a huge, it's more than 500 years plus of burdening, and more than 500 years plus of, I wouldn't use the word conspiracy, but it's a really centuries long processes that actually has paved this strong stony ways where many of these, I also can connect the point of view that you are talking about, because being in the middle, like looking at my skin, I sometimes feel like, do I have my father's skin or my mother's skin, or I have some Persian skin? Because to me, what is white, what is black, it is really difficult. But at the same time, I can see the pain that sometimes we are carrying when we are looking for ways how to really reanalyze and start deconstructing these painful processes of hegemony, of discrimination. So again, I would like to refer it to everyone. And if any of you haven't listened to this 1 hour long lecture of Rain Collins, Decolonizing Gender, then that would really answer many of these questions that we have raised today. Thank you, David, for adding your solidarity. Thank you.
I've written something on Message if people want to read it, and that sort of crystallizes what I'm thinking. I think what's going to happen is that there'll be quite an issue where I live, because there is the founding of my town was by Sir Richard Hotham, and he was had 4 boats that he took out to the Southeast India Company, and I think people look at him with pride and reverence, and I think if they really knew about the history of it, then I think we really need to understand that, and we need to talk and open up dialogue with the Black community, because I walk along the beach and I talk to Black people and ask them what they think, and there's still that attitude. People, if a Black guy is walking along with a white girl, white people say things to them talk about them under their breath and things like that. So, I'm on the periphery. I'm only 2 hours from London, but it's almost being like in another country where there's hardly any white people, Black people. And I used to live in Luton, and I went to a multicultural school, and that's what really shocked me, that I came down here and there's quite a racialized outlook. It's not just Black on Black, it's white on white as well, because we've had a massive influx of Polish people. And this is what led to, if anyone knows about Brexit, because people were so discontent about walking down the high street, hearing people speaking Polish, for example. So, it's an issue that people in Britain need to deal with, and they need to open it up to dialogue and understand it and admit where they need to, I suppose, retune their psyche so that they can actually accept people and not see people as intruders. But then this is not just a new thing here, it's everywhere in the world.
Renushi, I see Kalpani's hand up.
Yes, Kalpani, would you like to share some?
Yes, thank you, David, for your questions. And just to add some perspective from my experience in living in Bristol and also working as a model, my first original model card used to say mixed ethnicity background. And I was far too young to even understand what that meant, because I asked, why am I not Sri Lankan? And they would be like, no, it's just good for business. And you can pass for Blendian, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Black and Indian mixed, or Filipino mixed. You can be Indian and white mixed, or whatever it is, I would fit into that bracket. And I remember this one very particular incident where I went for a shoot and I had no idea what the casting call had been. I was just booked for it. And I went, and the lady who was doing my hair, I don't know if you guys can see, it's like curly, wavy. She was like talking to me, and she said, your English is so good. I was like, excuse me? And she was like, no, usually people from Ethiopia, that like the models from Ethiopia that we get, don't speak in English that well. And I was like, I'm actually Sri Lankan. And then she made a comment saying, oh, I'm so glad we didn't get a real Black girl, because I don't know what to do with their hair. And that's where I remember it being a turning point, where I started understanding I'm taking up space that is not meant for me because of white proximity, because I was just brown enough to be diverse, just what you call ethnic or exotic looking enough to pass off as another ethnicity, but not my own ethnicity. And that also happens in Sri Lanka. As I said, Naomi Campbell was the only reason that my features were even accepted. I have big lips, I have curly hair. Throughout my whole life, I've been referred to as either starving Ethiopian, African, very derogatory, racist sort of remarks, which also overlaps with our own history of being colonized, and how the Sri Lankan Kafir community has been seen, which is the Black community that's in Sri Lanka. And it's very derogatory. I'll hand off to the professor. I think he would have a lot more to add to this as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, no. I mean, I've been enjoying this whole conversation so enormously. So especially the things that Kalpani has just said, absolutely brilliant. I would specifically want to talk about the politics of statuary and sort of the statues that are being taken down, thrown in the river. We've seen the pictures. I come from Calcutta, and you know, Calcutta used to be the first British capital. And it remained the capital for many years till in 1911 the mantle was given to Delhi. Now Calcutta is full; it's absolutely full of colonial architecture, and even now we have the Victoria Memorial, which is where a lot of people go to. You know, tons and tons of people go to. It's a very major tourist attraction. And you know, I personally have been interested in colonial history for a very long time, and I'm particularly interested in the way in which across India, and I'm sure that this is something that applies to Sri Lanka as well, sort of, you know, statues of Queen Victoria. Where are they? You know, how prevalent are they? You know, and I am constantly, when I'm visiting a new city, the Calcutta has got Queen Victoria absolutely ensconced right there in the middle of an enormous park. And people are constantly posing in front of the statue. They've got absolutely no problems doing that. But of course, you know, when I was in Ahmedabad, I found the statue of Queen Victoria with her face kind of defaced, as it were, and lying at ground level, as it were, in what is called the Kite Museum. So basically, my point about sort of colonial statues is that rather than erase them from public spaces altogether, which I think is equally dangerous, because when you're actually taking the statues out of public view, in a strange way, you are also falsifying history. You're taking away a part of history. So therefore, what I actually think is that what maybe we could start to think about is to have a space where you could have these statues, these colonial statues, preserve them because they're a very important part of history, but their plinth should very, very clearly state exactly what was the extent of their complicity in the colonial project. I think that is something which would be much, much more useful rather than attempting to erase statues, throwing them into the water. And I think this is something that has already begun to happen in England, because they are now beginning to write inscriptions on the plinth that makes the colonial complicity very, very overt. So I think that could be one way of looking at it.
Thank you so much, Professor Niladri. In the interest of time, I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much to all 6 speakers. I think we were able to get so many dimensions, so many angles into this subject matter. So thank you again. And I'd like to hand the session over to Samita for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Renushi. I mean, I really have to admit that I didn't realize that we have been sitting here for 2 hours, and it had been a very interesting conversation. And I think all the speakers added so much of valuable points into the whole conversation of colonization and also the processes after decolonization, and also like brought so many thinking into how we can move forward from here. Like, I mean, we sometimes we all know that these things are happening, like, you know, that we only have reminded that these things are still taking place, and that, you know, people just to why not reflect on them again and again. But you know that we have also seen that there's a lot of ignorance, and you know, it's that we see but we don't see, we pretend that we don't see. Maybe because it brings us different privileges to our own selves, or maybe, like, you know, sometimes adhering to unjust systems also gives certain people power. So we don't want to reconstruct. So all these really, you know, matters in this conversation. So I think it's high time that, you know, that is one of the main objective of MenEngage Symposium, and also the MenEngage principles, that we kind of, you know, go into this critical conversation, go into this critical reflection. And I mean we are a movement building kind of alliance, you know, that deconstructing masculinity, transforming masculine way of living, and also, you know, deconstructing unjust power systems, social systems. So this is a kind of a movement building. So we want people to come into this dialogue and take the conversation from where they sit. You know, it could be your own house, it could be your own family. You know, recently I had this very interesting conversation with one of my close relatives, a male who came to me and said, I didn't know that you were a women activist, and I just wanted to tell you that it's what you do is it's you know, really it doesn't you know, it doesn't contribute much. Just don't bother yourself, because, you know, all these injustice that happen to women, it happened because they are a sinful people, you know. So that I had to tell him that, you know, if that is what you believe, then you should do more kind of meritorious things, because otherwise, you know, we see a lot of males are doing sinful things. And if you be born as a woman next birth, if we believe in, you know, next birth, if you believe in that, then you should at least do something in this birth, so that, you know, in your next birth as a woman, you will have a better life. So these conversations actually, you know, that we sometimes have to respond in a very critical way, so that people just have those reflections. It's ignorance is sometimes doesn't lead to anything. So I think this conversation opened up a lot of conversation, and lot of open lot of doors that we can have a look and, you know, start. I mean, as Kalpani also mentioned, that I start from where I am, you know, like this is my standpoint, I take from there. So I think it's what we all do. We take it from where we are, and we do what we can do from our own surroundings. So, and then, you know, take it into a more regional or global platform. So it's a very interesting dialogue it had been. I mean, we appreciate all the speakers who contributed today. it's like, just to summarize some of the things that we have been discussing today, the language, when it comes to South Asian language, and how English had been given the superior position in the society, even in most of the South Asian countries, the white skin, white supremacy, and the sex and sexual and cultural binaries that we have been brought into. So we are in these male female categories, and we don't go into, even within the male female, we don't go into different intersections, and and we don't go beyond the binaries. So those things we need to, although we have been kind of like sometimes, as Janaki also mentioned, sometimes people just say things for the sake of saying. They don't analyze them, they don't question them. They just say, yeah, we are kind of the gender stereotypes and all that, but nothing actually happens, because we are also sitting in these binaries and talking. We also don't feel comfortable moving into other spaces. And when we are quite, sometimes we have the fear that we will get kind of blacklash if we move into those spaces. And sometimes have more empathy towards people who couldn't come into the mainstream. So all those things actually go into these discussions with the Ubuntu Symposium in the coming months, coming years, and for the whole movement building of MenEngage Alliance and transform masculinities and patriarchal social systems. So I think we will definitely stop here for the moment, because we don't, I mean, it's quite interesting to talk the whole day, but still we sometimes have to limit ourselves and just say something and let other people take it forward. So that is what we will have to do today as well. So we will stop here, and I think we have done our contribution for the time given, and let's take it forward with all the participants who have been here, with all the speakers who will definitely contribute from their own ends. I mean, it's not their job just to come here and speak something and go back. They have been doing their role, and I'm sure they will take it back and kind of continue having this conversation. So thank you so much, each one of you. And Renushi, thank you for organizing. I mean, like, it had been a hectic job, I know, organizing and coordinating and also moderating. And Chaturika for keeping the time and doing all the logistics behind. And all the national coordinators of MenEngage Alliance in South Asia, who kind of nominated the speakers, who coordinated with us to organize this session in a very interesting way. So I thank everyone, and have a nice day. Thank you so much.